He was invisible to them, just the janitor sweeping the marble floors of a billionaire's gala. Laughter echoed when they mocked him, daring him with words meant to humiliate. Translate this, and maybe you're worth something. They never imagined he could understand, let alone respond. But what happened next would shatter their arrogance, flip the room in stunned silence, and spark a deal worth billions. How did a man they dismissed as nothing rise to outshine them all? The night was dazzling with golden chandeliers, polished marble, and the quiet hum of wealth that filled the grand ballroom. Business tycoons, heirs, and billionaires exchanged smiles and secrets over glasses of champagne. It was a world built on status and appearances, a world where people like him weren't meant to be noticed. He moved quietly along the edges, broom in hand, his uniform marking him as invisible in the eyes of the powerful. To them, he was just the janitor, someone who slipped in and out of rooms, cleaning up the remnants of their luxury without ever belonging. Yet behind his calm steps was a man of depth and dignity. Years of sacrifice had carried him from one country to another, crossing borders not for wealth, but for survival. He had languages stored in his mind like treasures, lessons learned in silence while working jobs nobody else wanted. But here, in this glittering hall, his story didn't matter. At least, not yet. The whispers of arrogance grew louder around him, mocking glances, cruel smirks. One family, a billionaire dynasty known for their pride, noticed him. And instead of kindness, they chose ridicule. What they didn't know was that this man they overlooked carried something far more valuable than any jewel in the room, something that would soon turn their laughter into shock. The room glittered with pride, a display of wealth so overwhelming that it seemed untouchable. The billionaire family at the center of it all thrived on that power. Their name was synonymous with privilege, and their arrogance had grown unchecked for generations. To them, mocking others wasn't cruelty, it was entertainment. Their eyes fell on him, the janitor in the corner, carefully wiping a spill near the edge of the ballroom. It was harmless work, but in their world, it was a symbol of status. He was beneath them, a reminder of their so-called superiority. One of the heirs smirked, leaning close to whisper to his father before raising his voice loud enough for the crowd around to hear. He spoke in a foreign tongue, a language rarely used outside of high-level negotiations. It was meant to confuse, to exclude. Then came the words that cut like knives. Translate this and I'll marry you. Let's see if the janitor is even worth our time, laughter exploded. The sound was sharp, cruel, and heavy. Heads turned toward him. Suddenly, the man who had been invisible was now the focus of every eye in the room. For a second, silence gripped his chest, the weight of years of humiliation pressing down like it always had. They weren't just mocking him. They were mocking everything he represented: immigrants, workers, people seen but never respected. But something shifted inside him. He remembered the nights he spent studying in dimly lit rooms, whispering words in different languages until they became second nature. He remembered being told he'd never be more than the help. He remembered the fire that had carried him through endless rejection. And in that moment, he realized this was no longer about him, it was about proving the worth they tried to erase. The laughter still echoed, but now he stood a little taller. Slowly, he set aside his broom and looked directly at the billionaire heir. A hush rippled through the room. They expected him to shrink, to retreat into silence. Instead, he opened his mouth and began to speak. The language rolled off his tongue effortlessly, not just word for word, but with a fluency that shocked them. The smirks began to fade. The heir's jaw tightened. For the first time, the family who had built empires on dominance and ridicule felt the sting of being powerless. Every sentence he spoke carried more than meaning, it carried dignity, defiance, and a reminder that intelligence and worth cannot be measured by a uniform. Guests leaned closer, stunned. Phones slipped into hands to record the moment. The room that once roared with laughter now hung in silence, the only sound the voice of a janitor who had become more commanding than any billionaire in the hall. And then something even more unexpected happened. A man at the far end of the room, one of the evening's most powerful guests, stood frozen. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't mocking. Instead, his eyes lit with recognition. He knew the language and he knew what the janitor had just done. The tide was turning, but nobody yet understood how quickly the night and their lives were about to change. The ballroom was frozen in disbelief. A janitor, someone they had mocked without hesitation, now commanded the room with nothing but his voice. The words he spoke weren't just translations. They carried nuance, depth, and power. He wasn't stumbling or guessing, he was flawless. The billionaire heir who had thrown the challenge shifted uncomfortably. His smirk was gone, replaced by the redness of humiliation spreading across his face. His family, who once laughed the loudest, now sat in silence, realizing the cruelty of their joke had backfired in front of the world's wealthiest and most influential guest. And then it happened. The man at the far end of the room, the CEO whose company had been negotiating $1 billion merger with the family, rose from his seat. All eyes turned as his voice broke the silence. He addressed the janitor directly, asking him to continue translating passages from confidential documents projected on the screen. Without hesitation, the janitor did. Line after line, complex financial jargon, cultural references, idioms that only a native or a scholar could decode, he translated them all seamlessly. Gasps filled the air. This wasn't luck. This was mastery. The CEO turned to the billionaire family, his expression sharp. "This man," he said firmly, pointing toward the janitor, "just saved me millions in miscommunication." He saw value where you saw ridicule. His next words cut deeper than any insult. "The deal is his now, not yours." The heir's face crumbled. Their billion-dollar empire shaken in a single night, not by rivals, but by the very man they thought beneath them. The janitor, once invisible, had become the center of power. Applause erupted across the hall. Cameras flashed. In that instant, the balance of arrogance and dignity flipped forever. What began as humiliation ended as triumph. Proof that greatness isn't hidden by uniforms or dismissed by wealth. Sometimes, it only takes one moment to turn the world upside down. The hall that once roared with cruel laughter now thundered with applause. But the man at the center of it all didn't smile in arrogance. He stood still, humbled, his broom leaning quietly against the wall as though it was waiting for him to return. Yet he knew his life had just changed forever. The billionaire family sat speechless, stripped of their pride in front of the very world they once commanded. Their wealth couldn't shield them from shame, and their power couldn't silence the truth. The man they mocked had outshone them in every way. For the janitor, the moment wasn't about money or fame. It was about dignity, something stolen from him countless times, now restored in a single night. He had walked into the ballroom invisible, but he walked out as living proof that respect cannot be bought, and brilliance cannot be buried. The CEO honored his word. A deal once destined for arrogant heirs was sealed with a man who had been dismissed as less. It wasn't just a business victory. It was a statement to everyone watching that worth is not measured by wealth, but by character. And as the cameras continued to flash, the world saw more than just a janitor's triumph. They saw the uncomfortable truth about society's prejudice, the quiet dismissal of those who serve, the arrogance of those who believe uniforms define value. His story became bigger than himself. It became a lesson whispered across millions of homes. Never underestimate the power of the overlooked. Because sometimes, the very people dismissed as nothing are the ones who carry the strength to change everything. So the question remains, how many more voices like his are waiting in silence, overlooked until the world finally chooses to listen?